The Piscean is back to continue pondering on astrology. And let's just cue these lights real quick. Alright. We got this really nice blue shirt on. And of course, sports jacket type of getting. Alright. Camera's creepy. Better. Alright. So I'm going to go over what this podcast is going to, behold. I'm going to dive into some deeper topics, like advanced astrology, quantum mythology. Alright, we've talked a lot about quantum on this channel, but I haven't really given an advanced astrology, quantum mythology type of lecture, like folklore. And I would like to give advanced astrology lecture on different house systems, advanced astrology conspiracy theories, and that's going to come via an almanac format, advanced astrology and contemporary issues, advanced astrology prognostication and pattern recognition, the two faces of each of the individual 12 zodiacal signs. I have quite a bit to go over. And specifically for this video, we will do the finger of destiny. And what does it mean? The finger of destiny? Y-O-D. The astrological yod. From Kabbalah to contemporary practice. And I was going to talk about this in the other videos, but you know what? Fuck it. We have now. So let's talk about it. Among the pantheon of astrological aspect patterns, few evoke as much fascination, dread, and mystical intrigue as the yod, known by its dramatic epithets, the finger of God, the hand of fate, or the finger of destiny. This narrow isosceles triangle formed by two sextile planets, both quincunx, a third, has captured the imagination of astrologers and clients alike since its identification in the mid-20th century. Unlike the ancient Time Lord techniques explored in previous essays and videos, the yod represents a distinctly modern contribution to astrological practice, one born from the cross-pollination of Kabbalistic symbolism, psychological astrology, and the mid-century fascination with configurations that seem to speak of destiny and divine intervention. The term yod itself derives from the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, a character that serves as an ideogram, meaning hand or pointing finger. This etymological root has profoundly shaped the interpretation of the configuration, imbuing it with connotations of divine pointing, karmic assignment, and inescapable fate. My mom is calling me. Okay, we are back. So, this etymological root has profoundly shaped the interpretation of the configuration, imbuing it with connotations of divine pointing, karmic assignment, and inescapable fate. Whew. Eyes are itchy. So yet the journey from Hebrew letter to astrological configuration is neither ancient nor straightforward. It is a story of 20th century esoteric synthesis, of astrologers seeking to map the subtle geometries of destiny onto the wheel of the zodiac. My cataracts. Alright. We are going to trace the advanced historical development of the Yod from its Kabbalistic origins through its identification by Karl Liebert, its elaboration by mid-century astrologers, its integration into psychological and evolutionary frameworks, and its contemporary status as one of the most discussed and debated configurations in modern astrology. In doing so, it illuminates not only the history of a single aspect pattern, but the broader processes by which astrological knowledge is created, transmitted, and transformed. The following timeline illustrates the key historical milestones in the development of Yod interpretation. So, of course, ancient Hebrew letter, it symbolizes a hand, pointing finger, divine spark. 1920s through 1930s, we had Karl Liebert coining the term Yod based on the Hebrew letter. 1930s through the 1940s, we had Thurza Escobar and Dane Rudar begin intensive study of configuration section, mid-century development. 1960s through 1970s, Joan Kellogg publishes esoteric interpretations of Yod dynamics. 1970s, Zipporah Dobbins integrates Yod into evolutionary astrology framework. 1977, Noel Tile discusses quincunx dynamics in counseling contexts. 1979, Dobbins publishes the Notebook linking Yod to karmic patterns. In 1990s, we had Liz Green connects Yod to Jungian archetypes and shadow work section. This is the contemporary era. 2000s, Karen Hamarker Zondag published the Yod book, Definitive Modern Text. And from 2000 to present, Yod detection automated in astrology software, ongoing scholarly debate. So we have to observe the Hebrew letter Yod in Jewish mysticism. So to understand the astrological Yod, one must first appreciate the profound symbolic weight of its namesake. The Hebrew letter is the 10th and smallest character in the Hebrew alphabet, yet in Kabbalistic tradition it carries cosmological significance far exceeding its modest form. In the Jewish mystical tradition, Yod represents a mere dot, a divine point of energy from which all creation emanates. It is the primordial seed, the initial impulse of the divine will from which the rest of the alphabet, and by extension, all of creation, unfolds. The Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah, teaches that the Yod is the point from which the universe originates, the first contraction of the infinite light into a point of potentiality. This concept of Zim Zum, divine contraction to make space for creation, finds resonance in the Yod's form, a single point suspended in space, containing within itself the potential for all that follows. The letter serves as the foundation for all other Hebrew letters. Indeed, every letter of the Hebrew alphabet contains within its form at least one Yod, making it the building block of written language and, by extension, of the created order. As an ideogram, Yod literally means hand or pointing finger, and this dual meaning, both the creative point and the pointing digit, would prove enormously suggestive for astrologers seeking to name a configuration that seemed to point towards something beyond itself. The image of a hand extended in gesture, of a finger indicating direction or destiny, captured perfectly the astrological intuition that certain planetary arrangements might signify divine intention or fated purpose. The pathway from Kabbalah to astrology. The incorporation of Kabbalistic terminology into Western astrology did not occur in ancient times, but rather through the esoteric revivals of the 19th and early 20th centuries. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in 1888, played a pivotal role in synthesizing Kabbalistic, Hermetic, and astrological traditions into a comprehensive system of Western esotericism. Golden Dawn members such as S.L. MacGregor Mathers and Arthur Edward Waite translated and popularized Kabbalistic texts, making concepts like the Sephirot the Hebrew letters, and the Tree of Life accessible to English-speaking esotericists. It was within this milieu of esoteric synthesis that the Hebrew letter Yod began to circulate as a symbol with astrological resonance. The Golden Dawn system of correspondences linked each Hebrew letter to astrological signs and planetary forces. Though the specific configuration we now call the Yod had not yet been identified, the groundwork was being laid for a later generation to see in the geometry of planetary aspects the shape of a Hebrew letter and to name it accordingly. The Theosophical Society, founded by Helena Blavatsky in 1875, further contributed to this cross-pollination of traditions, emphasizing the universal wisdom underlying all religions and esoteric systems. Theosophy's influence on 20th century astrology would be profound, providing a philosophical framework within which concepts like karma, reincarnation, and spiritual evolution could be integrated with astrological practice. When the Yod eventually received its name and interpretation, it would be understood within precisely such a framework, as a marker of karmic assignment and spiritual purpose. Let's talk about the identification of the configuration. Karl Liebhardt in mid-century astrology. Karl Liebhardt is the forgotten pioneer, as most of us will be. But the historical record credits Karl Liebhardt, a student of history and comparative religion, with originating the term Yod for the astrological configuration, as well as its more dramatic epithets, Finger of Destiny and Hand of God. While Liebhardt remains a relatively obscure figure in astrological history, detailed biographical information is scarce. His contribution to astrological terminology has proven enduring. Working in the mid-20th century, Liebhardt drew upon his studies of Hebrew language and Jewish mysticism to identify the resemblance between the planetary configuration and the form of the Hebrew letter Yod. The timing of Liebhardt's identification is significant. The mid-20th century witnessed a renewed interest in aspect patterns generally, building upon the work of earlier astrologers who had identified configurations like the Grand Trine, T-square, and Grand Cross. The notion that planetary arrangements might form recognizable geometric shapes that carry distinct meanings was well established. What Liebhardt contributed was the recognition of a specific shape, a narrow isosceles triangle formed by two sextiles and two quincunxes, and its naming according to Kabbalistic symbolism. Leiphardt's choice of the Hebrew letter was not arbitrary. The configuration, when drawn with lines connecting the three planets to the center of the horoscope, does indeed resemble a capital Y. The 10th Hebrew letter, Yod, corresponds roughly to the English Y, though sometimes to I or J. More significantly, the ideographic meaning of Yod as hand or pointing finger captured the visual impression of the configuration. The two base planets connected by sextile, both pointing via quincunx to the apex planet, creating an arrow-like form that seems to direct attention toward a focal point. Let's talk about the quincunx, the aspect at the heart of the Yod. The Yod's distinctive character derives primarily from the quincunx aspect, which is 150 degrees. Also called the inconjunct. Yes, the inconjunct. This aspect had been recognized in astrological tradition, but was generally considered minor and somewhat awkward. The Hellenistic astrologers, including Ptolemy, acknowledged the quincunx as a form of aversion, a separation between signs that shared no commonality of element, modality, or polarity. Planets in quincunx were understood to be in signs that had nothing in common, creating a relationship of inherent incompatibility and requiring adjustment. In the context of the Yod, the quincunx takes on amplified significance. The apex planet is quincunx to both base planets, meaning it shares neither element, modality, nor gender, masculine, feminine polarity with either of them. This complete lack of commonality creates a situation of profound tension. The energies of the apex planet cannot easily integrate with those of the base planets, yet they are linked through the geometry of the configuration. The result in astrological interpretation is a perpetual sense of adjustment, of being pulled in directions that do not naturally align. The sextile, which is 60 degrees, between the base planets provides a contrasting energy. Sextile is traditionally considered harmonious and opportunistic, representing areas where energies flow easily and support can be found. In the Yod, the sextile creates a foundation of harmony between the base planets, but this harmony is disrupted by the fact that both base planets are simultaneously at odds with the apex. The configuration thus presents a paradox, a harmonious foundation supporting a structure of inherent tension. Okay? Let's observe our early interpretive frameworks. Following Leipardt's identification of the configuration, astrologers Thirza Escobar and Dane Reuter undertook intensive study of the Yod, developing the interpretive frameworks that would shape subsequent understanding. Reuter, in particular, brought his characteristic synthesis of humanistic and transpersonal perspectives to bear on the configuration, viewing it as indicative of unusual destiny and spiritual purpose. The early interpretations emphasized the Yod's connection to fate and destiny. A natal Yod, it was proposed, indicates a life that proceeds along a certain pattern until the established pattern is abruptly interrupted and the native is forced to proceed in a new direction. The image often invoked was that of an unknown understudy who, on opening night, must fill the shoes of the leading actor due to the latter's sudden illness, a role for which the understudy has been prepared, perhaps unconsciously, but which they never expected to assume. This interpretive framework positioned the Yod bearer as one chosen for special purpose, whether they recognized it or not. The finger pointed at the apex planet indicated an area of life where fate would intervene, where circumstances beyond control would redirect a native's trajectory. Importantly, the early interpreters emphasized that such disruptions were not necessarily pleasant. The Yod is not inherently benefic, and the changes it indicates may be experienced as challenging or even traumatic. The fatefulness of the configuration lies not in the quality of events, but in their apparent inevitability. Let's talk about Joan Kellogg and the axes of awareness, the esoteric elaboration, Kellogg's contributions, and then we're going to talk about the activation point dynamics and the axes of awareness and practice. So, Joan Kellogg emerged as a significant voice in Yod interpretation with the publication of the Yod, its esoteric meaning. Though her work on the subject began decades earlier, Kellogg brought a distinctly esoteric and spiritual perspective to the configuration, elaborating concepts that would become central to subsequent understanding. Kellogg's most significant contribution was her identification of what she called the axis of awareness, the relationship between the Yod's apex planet, which she termed the fulcrum, and the point directly opposite it in the zodiac. This opposite point, which she called the activation point, represents the area where the Yod's energy can be triggered or realized. When transiting planets conjunct the activation point, they form an opposition to the apex planet, potentially activating the Yod and bringing its fated implications to the surface. The axis of awareness concept added crucial depth to Yod interpretation. It suggested that the configuration's energy does not remain static but can be dynamically engaged through transits and progressions. The activation point could serve as either an impediment or an enhancement, depending on the overall configuration and the planets involved. Kellogg provided examples from her own family, analyzing the Yods of her parents and siblings to demonstrate how the configuration manifested in actual lives marked by fateful circumstances and unusual achievements. Kellogg's framework for activation point interpretation drew upon the specific planetary energies involved. If Uranus occupied the activation point, she suggested the soul's special purpose would be subject to sudden disruption or might be fulfilled spontaneously without warning. This Uranian activation aligned with the planet's associations with unexpected change, revolution, and breakthrough. If Neptune occupied the activation point, Kellogg proposed a different dynamic. There would be deep awareness of and desire for fulfillment of some idealistic goal, perhaps involving service to all mankind. The Neptunian activation suggested a more mystical, intuitive connection connection to the Yod's purpose, with the native feeling drawn toward transcendent or universal aims. If Saturn occupied the activation point, one might infer a karmic burden or a need for disciplined, patient work to fulfill the Yod's promise. If Jupiter, expansion and protection, might attend the activation, Kellogg's framework thus provided a nuanced tool for understanding not only the static configuration but also its dynamic unfolding through time, a crucial contribution for predictive work. Kellogg illustrated her concepts through detailed case studies. Her father, Russell Leroy Lawson, possessed a double Yod involving Mars and Mercury, with Neptune on the activation point. Lawson's life was indeed marked by fateful circumstances, top secret work for the U.S. Air Force across 3 wars, experimental surgery that pioneered new medical techniques, and a near-death experience that became part of university research. The Neptunian activation point suggested the hidden secret nature of his work and its service to a larger whole. Her mother, Clara Victoria Lawson, had a moon Yod with Venus and Chiron, reflecting her fated role as a military wife and mother, nurturing a family through constant disruption while maintaining her own aspirations. The Chiron involvement suggested an element of suffering and healing woven into her maternal service. These case studies demonstrated the practical application of Kellogg's framework and provided compelling evidence for the Yod's association with fateful, purposeful lives. Her work moved Yod interpretation from abstract speculation to grounded analysis of actual charts, establishing a methodology that subsequent astrologers would refine and expand. Let's talk about Zipporah Dobbins and the nodal connection. Yes, the integration with karmic and evolutionary astrology. All right. In the 1970s, astrologer Zipporah Dobbins integrated the Yod into the emerging framework of karmic and evolutionary astrology. Her work, particularly the Node book, emphasized the Yod's role in soul-level lessons and its connection to the lunar nodes, those points in the chart that represent karmic past and evolutionary future. Dobbins viewed the Yod as a marker of past life resolutions requiring attention in the present incarnation. The quincunx aspects, with their inherent incompatibility, indicated areas where previous incarnations had left unresolved tensions, karmic debts, or unfinished business that demanded integration. The apex planet represented the focal point where these karmic threads converged, offering the native an opportunity for conscious resolution. This karmic framework resonated with the Yod's existing associations with fate and destiny, providing a metaphysical mechanism for understanding why certain lives seem marked by inescapable patterns. The finger of God became, in Dobbins' interpretation, the finger of karmic necessity, the pointing of past actions toward future consequences. Now let's talk about Jeffrey Wolf Green and evolutionary purpose. Well, Jeffrey Wolf Green, the founder of evolutionary astrology, further developed the Yod's karmic interpretation within his broader framework of soul evolution. Green emphasized the Yod as a marker of soul-level intuition, compelling the native to trust inner guidance when navigating the configuration's challenges. In Green's framework, the Yod's crises, triggered by the inherent tensions of the quincunx, serve a higher purpose. They teach the soul to release ego attachments and embrace humility, ultimately facilitating spiritual maturation. The discomfort of the Yod isn't merely something to be endured, but a catalyst for growth, a pressure that refines the soul as it moves toward its evolutionary goals. The apex planet in this interpretation represents the area where the soul's evolutionary purpose most directly manifests. Its sign and house placement indicates the domain through which spiritual growth must occur, and the challenges it faces reflect the specific lessons the soul has chosen to master in this incarnation. And the base planets, with their harmonious sextile, represent resources and supports available for this evolutionary work, talents, relationships, or circumstances that can aid the soul's journey. Esoteric astrology. Drawing upon the teachings of Alice Bailey and the Tibetan master DJ Wall, Kul offered yet another layer of Yod interpretation. From this perspective, the Yod represents divine intervention in human affairs. a pointing from higher planes toward the soul's true purpose. The configuration's rarity and apparent faithfulness reflect its origin in the soul's prenatal choices. The yod is built into the chart at incarnation to ensure that certain lessons cannot be avoided. The esoteric interpretation emphasizes the yod bearer's responsibility to discern and fulfill their special purpose, unlike more fatalistic readings which might suggest that events will unfold regardless of conscious participation. The esoteric view holds that the native must actively engage with the yod's energy, seeking to understand and cooperate with its direction. The finger of God points, but the individual must choose to follow. All right? Let's talk about Noel Till and the quindecile. So Noel Till, one of the most influential astrologers of the late 20th century, contributed significantly to yod interpretation through his emphasis on the quincunx and his exploration of the related quindecile 165 degrees aspect. Till's approach was deeply psychological, focusing on how aspect patterns manifest in personality, motivation, and life experience. Till described the yod's energy as disruptive yet directive, often linked to obsessive drives and a sense of life mission. The native with a yod, in Till's view, experiences a persistent inner pressure, a feeling of being called towards something not fully understood. This pressure could manifest as restlessness, anxiety, or an unshakable sense of purpose, depending on how the individual engages with the configuration. Till's emphasis on the quincunx as an aspect requiring adjustment resonated with the yod's interpretive tradition. The quincunx, he taught, demands that we adapt, that we find ways to integrate energies that don't naturally fit together. In the yod, this demand is amplified because this apex planet must adjust to two base planets simultaneously, creating a perpetual state of adaptation that can be both exhausting and transformative. Liz Green, co-founder of the Faculty of Astrological Studies in London and a practicing Jungian analyst, brought depth psychology to bear on yod interpretation. Her work connected the configuration to Jungian concepts of archetype, shadow, and individuation, offering a sophisticated framework for understanding how yod energies manifest in the psyche. In Green's analysis, the apex planet of a yod often represents an area where the ego struggles with shadow material, unconscious contents that resist integration, precisely because they are so different from the conscious personality. The quincunx aspects reflect this resistance. The ego cannot easily assimilate the shadow, yet the shadow persistently demands attention. The result is a sense of being haunted by something one cannot quite grasp, a recurring theme or issue that refuses to be resolved. The sextile between base planets in this framework represents resources available for shadow integration, perhaps supportive relationships, innate talent, or life circumstances that can facilitate the work of making the unconscious conscious. The yod as a whole thus becomes a map of the individuation process, showing where the soul must grow and what resources are available for that growth. Green's Jungian approach transformed the yod from a fateful marker into a tool for therapeutic insight. Rather than simply indicating where destiny would intervene, the configuration revealed where psychological work was most needed and most possible. This reframing aligned with a broader shift in late 20th century astrology toward counseling and personal growth applications. Let's talk about the golden yod. A benefic variation, definition, and geometry related to the yod, though much less commonly discussed, is the golden yod. This configuration involves one planet forming biquintiles, 144 degrees, to two others that are separated by a quintile, 72 degrees. The geometry differs from the standard yod, but the visual impression is similar, a triangular pattern with a focal point. The aspects involved, quintile and biquintile, are traditionally considered benefic and creative. Quintiles are associated with talent, genius, and creative expression. They represent areas where the native has natural gifts or can develop exceptional abilities. Biquintiles amplify this energy, suggesting a harmonious flow of creative potential. Because the aspects involved in the golden yod are seen as beneficial, the configuration itself is interpreted as benefic. The few astrologers who have studied it regard it as an extremely creatively charged configuration, good for artistic skill and creative achievement. The association of quintiles and biquintiles with Neptune, planet of inspiration, imagination, and artistic sensitivity, reinforces this interpretation. The golden yod suggests that the native possesses exceptional creative gifts that can be developed and expressed. Unlike the standard yod, which emphasizes tension, adjustment, and fateful disruption, the golden yod points toward harmonious expression of innate talent. The finger in this case points not toward crises, but toward creative potential waiting to be realized. Let's talk about Hitler's golden yod. Yes, Adolf Hitler. The example of Adolf Hitler's golden yod, discussed by astrologer Patricia L. Atlanta Astrology, illustrates the complexity of interpreting even benefic configurations. Hitler's chart featured a golden yod with a Capricorn moon Jupiter conjunction at the apex, biquintile to Saturn in Leo, and Neptune conjunct Pluto in Gemini. The interpretation of this configuration raises profound questions about the nature of astrological goodness. Hitler possessed extraordinary oratorical gifts and the ability to inspire masses, creative talents consistent with the golden yod's associations, yet these gifts were deployed in service of evil. The configuration's benefic nature didn't guarantee benevolent expression. It merely indicated exceptional creative potential, the moral direction of which depended on the native's choices and character. This example underscores a crucial principle in yod interpretation generally. Configurations indicate potential, not predestination. The same geometry that produces a Gandhi can also produce a Hitler. The astrologer's task isn't to pronounce judgment, but to understand the energies at play and support the native in their constructive expression. The advent of astrological software has dramatically increased awareness and analysis of yods. Programs like SolarFire, Kepler, and others automatically detect aspect patterns, including yods, making it possible for astrologers to identify configurations that might otherwise be overlooked. This automation has democratized access to yod analysis, enabling practitioners at all levels to engage with the configuration. Excuse me. However, automation has also raised questions about interpretation. Software detects patterns based on user-defined orbs, but the significance of those patterns requires human judgment. A yod with wide orbs may be technically present, but minimally influential. A yod involving minor points may be less impactful than one involving personal planets. Contemporary practitioners must balance the convenience of automation with the nuance of interpretive skill. All right, almost finished here. So, the question of allowable orbs for yod formation remains a matter of debate. Most authorities recommend tight orbs for the quincunxes, typically 2 to 3 degrees. Given the subtle nature of this aspect, the sextile between base planets can allow somewhat wider orbs, perhaps 4 to 6 degrees, as sextile is considered a softer aspect with broader influence. These orb parameters significantly affect which configurations qualify as yods. A pattern with quincunxes of 4 degrees may be mathematically present, but would not, by most standards, constitute a functional yod. The tightness of the orbs correlates with the intensity of the configuration's influence. Tighter orbs suggest more focused, powerful energy. Estimates of yod prevalence vary depending on orb criteria. With tight orbs, 2 to 3 degrees for quincunxes, yods appear in perhaps 5 to 10% of natal charts. With wider orbs, the percentage increases. The configuration is thus uncommon but not exceptionally rare. Most practicing astrologers will encounter it regularly in their work. The question of whether yods have become more commonly discussed than their prevalence warrants is a subject of ongoing debate. Some critics argue that the configuration's dramatic name and associations have led to overemphasis, with astrologers seeing fingers of God where simpler interpretations might suffice. Others maintain that the yod's distinctive geometry and psychological impact justify its prominence in astrological discourse. The yod has acquired a reputation as a neurotic configuration associated with restlessness, frustration, anxiety, obsession, and depression. This reputation derives from the inherent tension of the quincunx aspects and the sense of being driven by forces beyond one's control. Yod bearers often report feeling that they are somehow different, that they have a special purpose they cannot quite grasp, that life pushes them in directions they did not choose. Yet contemporary interpreters increasingly emphasize that this reputation is not inevitable. The yod's challenges can be worked with consciously. The sense of neurosis may reflect resistance to the configuration's energy rather than the energy itself. The key to working with a yod, as one contemporary astrologer puts it, is to be aware of it, to familiarize oneself with all the planets involved, and consciously attempt to integrate their energies. This perspective aligns with a broader shift in astrology, from fatalism to empowerment. The yod may indicate fateful patterns, but it doesn't remove human agency. The native can choose how to engage with the configuration's energy, can work to integrate its tensions, can find constructive expression for its drives. When multiple yods appear in a single chart, a rare but possible occurrence, they create complex dynamics. Shared planets may tie the yods together, creating a network of tensions and purposes that the native must navigate. One astrologer imagines this as a tag team wrestling match inside the individual, in which the various players take turns and relentlessly goad the person on. The chart of musician Prince provides an example of multiple yods. Prince had one yod with Mars at 0 degrees Aries as apex, quincunx Neptune at 2 degrees Scorpio, and Pluto at 29 degrees 57 Leo. A second yod had Neptune as apex, quincunx Mercury at 4 degrees Gemini, and Mars at 0 degrees Aries. The shared apex planets, Neptune and Mars, tied the configurations together, creating a complex web of creative, mystical, and assertive energies that manifested in Prince's revolutionary musical career and his reclusive personal life. Let's conclude with the yod as a modern myth. The history of the astrological yod is in many ways a history of modern astrology itself, emerging from the esoteric synthesis of the early 20th century, developed through the mid-century fascination with aspect patterns, elaborated through karmic, psychological, and evolutionary frameworks, and now automated and debated in contemporary practice. The yod reflects the creative, syncretic, and evolving nature of astrological tradition. Unlike the ancient techniques examined in previous videos, techniques with demonstrable lineages reaching back to Hellenistic Egypt and Babylonia, the yod is a distinctly modern creation. Its name derives from Kabbalah, but its identification occurred in the mid-20th century. Its interpretations draw upon theosophy, Jungian psychology, and evolutionary spirituality. Its popularization has been shaped by books, workshops, and softwares. The yod is in a sense a contemporary myth, a story we tell about fate, purpose, and the geometry of the heavens. Yet this modernity does not diminish its value. The yod provides a framework for understanding experiences that many people report, the sense of being called towards something unknown, of facing persistent tensions that demand integration, of living a life that seems marked by purpose beyond conscious choice, whether one attributes these experiences to planetary geometry, psychological projection, or something else entirely. The yod offers a language for speaking about them, a symbolic vocabulary for the ineffable. For the advanced astrologer, like myself and you, the yod presents both opportunities and cautions. The opportunity is to work with a configuration that speaks deeply to clients' experiences of fate and purpose, to offer frameworks for understanding that can support growth and integration. The caution is against over-interpretation, against seeing fate where simpler explanations might serve, against allowing the drama of the finger of God to obscure the mundane realities of human choice and circumstance. The history of the yod teaches us that astrological knowledge is not fixed but fluid, not revealed but created, but not ancient but ever new. The configuration that Karl Liebhardt named in the mid-20th century has already evolved through multiple interpretive frameworks, and we will undoubtedly evolve further. What remains constant is the human need to find meaning in the patterns of the heavens, to see in the dance of planets some reflection of our own struggles, purposes, and destinies. The yod, whatever its ultimate significance, serves this need. In pointing towards fate, it points also toward ourselves as humans. In the human puppet dimension, subscribe to the channel, like my videos, comment on my videos, give me questions, give me thoughts, give me whatever you feel like it. And I will see you in the next video.